All right, Bismillah. We are continuing our discussion on the 27th word of Risale-i, the treatise on independent judgments of the law, or ijtihad. So a quick summary. There are 6 obstacles to entering the door of independent judgments. The first one is the context, that there's a correct time and place to make ijtihad. Second is specificity, that certain things have been made thoroughly specified, and they are therefore beyond the realm of ijtihad, such as the essential teachings of the religion. Third is dilution. It is much harder to make independent judgments after the passage of time, because it has diluted our understanding of the religion. The fourth is intention. The wrong intentions can corrupt the practice of independent judgments. And we are currently on the 5th obstacle, which is interpretation, where the author mentions there being 3 points of view that make interpretation of the law earthly and prevents it from being heavenly. And so the first was the wisdom versus the reasoning of an ordinance. Yeah, the second being how practitioners or people who make these independent judgments, how they are motivated either by worldly versus eternal happiness. And we are on the third point of view that has to do with necessity making permissible what is forbidden. So I'll read through this section real quick. So there is a rule: necessity makes permissible what is forbidden. This rule is not universal, so long as it is not by way of what is forbidden. Necessity makes licit what is forbidden, but if something has become a necessity due to abuse and for illicit reasons, this necessity may not be the basis of ordinances permitting it, nor form an excuse. For example, if through ill choice someone makes himself drunk in an unlawful way, according to scholars of the Sharia, his actions act against him, and he may not be counted as excused. If he divorces his wife, the divorce is enforced, and if he commits a crime, he receives the punishment. But if it is not through ill choice, the divorce is not enforced, neither does he receive punishment. And for example, even if an alcoholic is addicted to alcohol to the degree of necessity, he may not say it is a necessity and lawful for me. And so this is an interesting example being given here, that, even that a man who becomes drunk and, unaware of his actions, he does something prohibited, such as a crime, or if he does something not prohibited, right? He divorces his wife, he still suffers from the consequence of what he has done, because he has consciously chosen to become drunk. Whereas it may be if a person is drunk accidentally, he is not liable to be held accountable for becoming, the actions or the consequence of what he has done while he was drunk. And even in the case of an addict that faces severe withdrawals, let's say if they don't get their substance, at that point, he's saying even if it's a necessity, for this person to receive some prohibited substance, even then, he is not allowed to say that it is halal or necessity, or some sort of like an obligation that he has to receive these things. I'll continue. Thus, at this time, there are many matters which have reached the degree of necessity and have taken on the form of a general calamity afflicting people, and which, since they have arisen from ill choice, illicit desires, and forbidden acts, may not be the basis of ordinances permitting them and making them what is unlawful lawful. However, since those who make interpretations at the present time make those necessities the basis of ordinances of the Sharia, their interpretations are earthly, the products of their own fancies, tainted by philosophy, and cannot be heavenly or revealed, or in accordance with the Sharia. However, if exercise of authority concerning the divine ordinances of the Creator of the heavens and the earth, and interference in the worship of his servant is without the Creator's permission, that exercise of authority and interference are rejected. For example, a number of the heedless and neglectful approve the changing of some of the marks of Islam, like the Friday sermon, and substituting the language of each country for Arabic, for two reasons. The first, so that in that way the mass of Muslims will understand current politics, but current politics has become so intermixed with lies and trickery and evil that it has become like the very whisperings of Satan. However, the pulpit is the seat of delivering divine revelation, so political rumors do not have the right to rise to that high position. The second, the Friday sermon is for understanding the admonitions of certain surahs of the Quran. Yes, if the majority of the Islamic nation conformed to the essential teachings and incontestable matters of Islam and the ordinances which are well known and carried them out, then the reading of the sermon in the known language and the translation of the Quran if it was possible, might have been desirable. Read that again. Yes, if the majority of the Islamic nation conformed to the essential teachings and incontestable matters of Islam and the ordinances which are well known and carried them out, then the reading of the sermon in the known language and the translation of the Quran, if it was possible, might have been desirable in order to understand the theoretical matters of the Sharia and its subtle matters and abstruse teachings. But the well-known incontrovertible ordinances of Islam, like the 5 daily prayers, fasting in Ramadan and Zakah, and the unlawfulness of murder, fornication, and wine, are neglected. The ordinary people are not in need of learning their necessity or unlawfulness, but through encouragement and warning to be reminded of those sacred decrees, and through their sense of belief and feelings for Islam being stirred, to be prompted, encouraged, and reminded to conform to them. However lowly and arrogant they may be, they understand the following brief meaning from the Quran and Arabic sermon. The preacher and the reciter of the Quran are recalling the pillars of belief and Islam, which are known by me and everyone, and teaching us and reciting them. A longing for them is born in their hearts. What words are there in the universe which can be compared with the miraculous instructive reminders, warnings, and encouragements of the all-wise Quran, which comes from the sublime throne? All right, there's a lot going on. Mhm. So I think we'll start from the example of the Friday sermon. Maybe I'll read it again a little bit more slowly. So, yep, for example, a number of the heedless and neglectful approve the changing of some of the marks of Islam, like the Friday sermon, and substituting the language of each country for Arabic for two reasons. So, what I'm understanding, instead of, hmm, okay, the first, so that in that way, the mass of Muslims will understand current politics, but current politics has become so intermixed with lies and trickery and evil that it has become like the whisperings of Satan. However, the pulpit is the seat of delivering divine revelation, so political rumors do not have the right to rise to that high position. Alrighty. So, um, this first part, for example, is a little interesting to me. I think he's making what he's saying is heedless and neglectful people approve changing the sermon, the Jummah Khutbah, from Arabic to the language of the local people. And I find it interesting that he would call it heedless and neglectful. Um, I probably have no doubt that he follows the Hanafi madhab, if that's any relevant information, where the sermon is most certainly done in Arabic. But okay, so he's saying the first reason is that people want to, use the Jummah khutbah as a platform to promote some sort of politics or worldly, I don't know, message. And I think we might say, yeah, of course, we are here gathered in God's house, not for the purpose of any worldly benefit, but for some sort of eternal salvation, some guidance, uh, for something larger than what can be affected by politics or something like that. So yeah, we understand that's not a good reason, right, for changing, using as a basis to change the language of the khutbah from Arabic into, the common tongue. Any comments on this point? Yes, Suhail, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I think at least the broader point I take from this is that, understanding like in the context he's writing this in is that I think he probably is writing this, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the implementation of Turkish for what he would call the marks of Islam. So he would call Jummah or the khutbah a mark of Islam, in that it is sort of the outward representation or the societal or communal representation of Islam, like the adhan or the prayer, as well as the khutbah. It's the community or society coming together and vocalizing or not vocalizing, but presenting their sort of worldview out into the open. So they, you know, like there's an outward acknowledgement of what they believe in through like the Jummah khutbah. And so, when people in his era or his period were trying to change it to Turkish potentially, it's essentially a secularization of Jummah. It's saying we're going to appropriate this and strip it of its meaning, because the authority then is not God, is not one who has dominion over all things, but is the state. And so I think that's kind of what I he's to me he's like implying or taking away from this. Hence why he brings up the notion of politics, because you know uh, talking politics on the minbar, which happens quite often even today, is bringing quite fundamentally like secular ideas or secular sort of a worldview, because that's fundamentally what politics. I mean, I don't know how political discourse is today. A lot of it's predicated on just the secular framework that, as he says somewhere else, like might makes right rather than right makes might. It's all about power and authority, and the state is supreme. The nation state's supreme, and so they act as God. And so, in other words, the state's sort of supplanting belief on the minbar with its own sort of discourse, own sort of language, and then saying you need to use our language rather than. I mean, I don't think Arabic per se is supreme, but what he's saying is that like the Quran and therefore Quranic Arabic or any sort of words or language that pertain to the Quran and to the Sunnah is sacrosanct, is sacred. It's not secular. So you bringing your own words and language to the minbar in your own language is ridiculous. So it has no place there, because that's not the point of Jummah at all. So it's a place where the recognition of divine ownership and dominion and power is recognized and acknowledged, and it's acknowledged using his language, God's language, or the language of the Quran and the language of the Prophet. So I think that's what he's trying to say here. At least that's what I took away from it.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. I guess there could be another understanding of what he's saying, that he's not saying that all cases of using the common language is wrong. Possibly. I have to yet dissect the second reasoning, but maybe it's so that these two specific reasonings that are being used to adopt the common language instead of Arabic are wrong, right? Because maybe that's what he's saying specifically in his time. But yeah, Yusuf, would you like to speak?
So it's interesting that he is bringing up marks of Islam, like Friday sermon. So marks of Islam is an interesting notion, because he's giving this just as an example of the same thing is being done for other marks of Islam. But he is now picking one example, which is Friday sermon, and an interesting example. But let's first focus on what's a mark of Islam. Like a mark of Islam is something that like signifies or shows, demonstrates submission to the authority of the Creator. And it shows that I am a Muslim and I am taking this stand in my life. So it has this very strong connotation. So this is important because, as now we have been talking about, like in the fifth, how did the fifth obstacle started with? Changing wisdom, changing reason with wisdom, or vice versa, sorry, changing wisdom with reason. So a exchange of illa versus hikmah. So just showing that, oh, the purpose of doing this is for that reason, that purpose, that wisdom. So, and now the wisdom has changed, so let's change the behavior. This is the current mentality, and the author was rejecting, saying that this is not how it works. It cannot be. The purpose of doing something is because it's commanded, was author's point, right? So same thing is at work here, or something similar at least. Author is saying that there are marks of Islam, meaning that if you are submitting to the Creator, this is how you would know it, how others would know it, because you would show it to yourself and show it to others as well. But now coming up with excuses or wisdoms to alter this is again looking to the point that you didn't understand why Juma is for, or what a mark of Islam means. So I'm going to take back to, again, the first point. So let's say if someone says, not eating pork is because pork is dirty, and now the porks are being raised in very sterile environment, and also that when eating pork, I can get to know the name of my creator, Ar-Razzaq, the sustainer. So actually, you know what? Pork is permissible. Now I replaced wisdom with illah, the reason here. The first one was saying that this is not possible and it doesn't make any sense, right? So even I can give a further absurd example, like having relationship with the opposite gender out of wedlock. So you know what? I mean, of course, it had some societal impact. This is why it was forbidden back in the day. But today there are ways to avoid this, and both sides are okay with that and whatnot. And then you know what? When doing such an action, I'm going to get to know my creator as the beautiful one and the provider of joys and whatnot. So you know, I am doing I'm reading divine names in this act. So it is permissible. So, I mean, these two examples are clearly absurd. This is why I'm giving those absurd examples, actually. So, in both cases, what did I do? I replaced wisdom with illah, the reason. So, definitely, I made something that is heavenly into earthly. Now, the author applies a similar pattern to here. But this time he says there are marks of Islam. First and foremost, the purpose or the function of this thing is to show submission. But if you bring in different wisdoms into this, such as the first and the second that he is listing here, saying, Juma is, we are collecting people in there, and the purpose of that collecting people together is, why? Because we need to tell them the Islamic politics. I mean, in the case of Turkey, it was the secular politics. That's right. But nowadays, let's say if it was Saudi Arabia, or let's say their language is not the Arabic, but let's think about another, Pakistan, let's say. So it's Islamic country, and let's say they say the same, let's assume. Would it be okay? Because still it's an Islamic state, quote unquote. Would their politics be any different? So the author says this is not the place of declaring your politics, which has, other than the name of your state being Islamic, you don't have much about being Islam. So this is not a place for that. Your politics is not heavenly. Like at the time of Rasulullah, Khutbah was used also for, let's say, calling people to jihad. But is your state of governing has anything to do with that? So your governing is earthly, so you cannot bring khutbah or anything of this sort, which is a symbol of Islam, to your purposes. So this is why I think overall, although it sounds a bit counterintuitive, and we talked about it last week a little, doing something just because it's commanded is such a huge message for myself, first and foremost. I can find further wisdoms in why such an action is commanded, but these are, now I am talking about it as wisdom, they are secondary wisdoms. The first wisdom of a command is you obey the command because it's a command. If you take it as a wisdom, actually this is the number one wisdom behind any command of the religion. Because last time we talked about the inheritance law and whatnot. So same thing applies to here. It's a symbol of Islam. It's a symbol of showing my submission. So changing it is going to violate this number one purpose of this khutbah, then that means you're already violating the purpose of khutbah. What wisdom are you bringing into the picture? That's what I understand.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So so I do certainly respect the, the commands of God, right? No real let's say reasoning. You don't need to really understand the reasoning as much as you know who your creator is and what he's telling you to do. Um and so it gets a little, for me, it gets a little murky when we come to these marks of Islam, like the Friday sermon. I don't know if that was necessarily a command, right? But we say it reached the status of being a mark of Islam, right? And I would be curious to see, how it got there, right? Unless it was a literal command, or just through the sunnah or something like that. So that's just something on my end. But I can certainly see the your line of reasoning and the importance of not, let's say, changing things for the sake of our desires, or we see some reasoning and logic in things, and just doing whatever we want to the religion. Brother Suhail.
I was gonna say something else, but to answer your question, it's in the Quran. I mean, it's a command, specifically, for, I don't know the exact verse, but for people to leave their work and to go to prayer and then to return. Um, I think it specifically references Jama, but I think what defines a mark, to touch on what Yusuf says, is, not only does it show it to yourself, but it shows it to the world it's around you. So whether somebody else is a believer or a non-believer is irrelevant. So Juma is one such mark of Islam. It's something in which people can say, and people can look at and say, that is fundamentally Islamic. The way in which people pray, the fact that people pray together, the fact that people fast, the fact that people make Hajj, or specifically recite, as he points out here, like recite something in Arabic. Like, I don't recite the Quran personally. I mean, people may, but I don't. If somebody can recite it in Arabic, that person would not recite it in English or some other language, because that in and of itself is also a mark of Islam. Um, it's something fundamentally, a mark by definition means it's like it can be demonstrated, it can be seen or shown. Like, nobody can see what I believe in, but they can see how that belief manifests. You know, by what I say and how I say it and what I do, what are my actions, um, and not just my personal, but then communal actions as well. Um, or, like, for example, we brought up inheritance. That's fundamentally a communal action. It involves other people, relationship with others, um, relationship with the environment around me. Not eating pork or drinking alcohol. Right? Those are fundamentally marks. They have an external aspect to them, and I think it's interesting in that, when people are always trying to, like, while Yusuf was talking, it came to my mind that, well, people, are always trying to point out the wisdom. It's like, oh, well, I don't eat pork because X, Y, and Z, or drink alcohol because of X, Y, and Z. My experience, like, at least people who are not Muslim, they're always sort of fascinated and I think it's like a fitri thing, that um, people are always fascinated by an individual. I mean, I'm not speaking about myself, but like, people who are saying, oh, people actually do that. People pray, and like they follow this sort of schedule, and people fast, and, oh, I can't believe that you fast for a month, or people go make a pilgrimage. Like, in other words, the entirety of one's life is sort of dictated by um, certain commands, rather than just sort of going with the flow and, like, living life without any sort of aim or direction, because there is no sort of um, authority over oneself. Um, it's just, whatever I think, whatever I feel like doing. Um, And I think, there's some sort of fitr aspect, because I think people are sort of, whether they actually like agree with it or not is secondary, but the fact that people are fascinated by that people would feel so strongly that they're going to alter their life. I mean, if you think about like the time of the prophet, people go from like essentially the entire Meccan society and Median society were overturned by one man and his message. And it's like people still study that today. Like, how do people who are like essentially Bedouins, like their entire society and how they conduct themselves, completely overturned in a span of 23 years. It's unbelievable, because their entire sort of who they were, their own mark changed, and what they did changed, because they recognized to whom belongs this, the dominion or sovereignty. Um, because that was their primary concern, rather than trying to sort of rationalize, maybe not really rationalize, but try to understand the command. I'm not saying that you can't, like the wisdom, but like that wasn't their primary focus. But I think people are sort of impressed by that, or sort of captivated by that, because I do think it's some sort of inner human state to actually want to submit. Whether people actually do or not is a secondary, but
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I I will say we don't need to really push this further, but I will say there's some tension where you know people may not necessarily do these things, right? This is probably a separate topic, but people might not be, just pray, fast, and avoid pork because of the obligation, but because it's just the culture and, growing up in there. And so I guess maybe that's what leads to the push for like reasonings and wisdoms and this and that. They don't want to just follow the traditions or but yeah, like I said, that's probably a separate topic. We can continue to the second reason. The Friday sermon is for understanding the admonitions of certain surahs of the Quran. So that's the second reason. Yes, if the majority of the Islamic nation conformed to the essential teachings and incontestable matters of Islam and the ordinances which are well known and carried them out, then the reading of the sermon in the known language and the translation of the Quran, if it was possible, might have been desirable in order to understand the theoretical matters of the Sharia and its subtle matters and abstruse teachings. But the well-known, incontrovertible ordinances of Islam, like the 5 daily prayers, fasting in Ramadan, and zakah, and the unlawfulness of murder, fornication, and wine, are neglected. The ordinary people are not in need of learning their necessity or unlawfulness, but through encouragement and warning to be reminded of those sacred decrees, and through their sense of belief and feelings for Islam being stirred to be prompted, encouraged, and reminded to conform to them. However lowly and arrogant they may be, they understand the following brief meaning from the Quran and Arabic sermon. The preacher and the reciter of the Quran are recalling the pillars of belief and Islam which are known by me and everyone, and teaching us and reciting them. A longing for them is born in their hearts. What words are there in the universe which can be compared with the miraculous, instructive reminders, warnings, and encouragement of the all-wise Quran, which comes from the sublime throne? So he's saying, he's giving an exception that, yeah, you you could given, a khutbah in the language of the common people, if it were to go to in order to understand the theoretical matters of Sharia and its subtle matters and abstruse teachings. But because most people could probably not understand such a thing, it's not worth it's not worth doing that. That instead the focus is on the well-known ordinances of Islam, like the 5 daily prayers and such, which people, from what I understand, he's saying people, they do not need to know these things. They already inherently know them, but they need encouragement and warning and reminders, which the best form of these are from the Quran itself, right? The Quran itself does the purpose, or fulfills the purpose of providing warnings and encouragements and such, and it does it in the best way, which is, we understand that. But I guess the issue is he expecting people to have a knowledge of the Quran, like they recognize these verses, right? Is that the assumption here? Because if it's like, people don't really know lots of words, right? You're dealing with maybe lots of converts or people just unfamiliar with Arabic. Is that beyond his assumption of who the audience is, or is that relevant at all? Can anybody answer this? Because he's saying specifically all right, I don't know who went first. Brother Suhail, would you like to say something?
I'll just say briefly, I'm not as like concerned with if somebody says the Jummah can be held in some other language or not. I think his point is that people are, using are changing a mark of Islam to suit their sort of whims, and has nothing to do with, because I mean, he even says you can make an exception in the case he makes an exception for. I mean, whether somebody agrees with that or not is irrelevant to me. But the point is that, his exception is for something that has to do with the divine, and not with like, things that are, as you used to put it, earthly. Like, so I think to me is, that's the broader point, I would say. But that's what I took away from it.
Yeah, I definitely see that point. And that point is certainly made within the first several lines, right? The first at least third of the paragraph. I'm just trying to understand the rest of what is going on after that. I mean, maybe it's not necessary. The main point is there that yes, there are certain instances where you would or you should have the khutbah in the common tongue. Of course, the main point being, what is it about? Why are you doing that? Brother Yusuf.
So, what is the point of khutbah becomes a second question, I guess, here. Like the first one was a sign of Islam, but also now he says the point of khutbah is to not to give like detailed information to the people. Like people are coming to Jummah because they believe in God. They're Muslims. So it's not that they are like on the like they have doubts about details and whatnot, but they are Muslims. This is why they are there. So you're not speaking to other public, but there are certain people. And now in that society, now it's a point for them to, for you to remind them what are their obligations. And it's important now that the author is bringing the topic of importance of reminder, because especially as you get into like teaching, learning, reading a little bit, we feel like, oh, I heard this before. Why are you repeating it? But when we think about human life, the importance of reminder comes into the picture. So it's not that people don't behave because they don't know it, but maybe because they become ignorant or they are becoming insensitive, and they are in need of a reminder in this sense. And it says, look at the state of the society. Like people are, although they say I submit to the creator, people do not even submit to the number one command of like salat, fasting, or zakat, or these fundamentals, or very fundamental harams, forbiddances. People do not observe these. So Jummah khutbah should be, or the number one concern in there should be to remind people of those responsibilities. But if you say, well, we should talk about like certain details about things, or lecture people during khutbah, author's point here is that this is not the purpose of Jummah khutbah. Let it be something else, but the point of Jummah khutbah is, Friday sermon is, that people are reminded about it. And he says, what reminds them the best? Is it going to be, this Imam said and explained it very reasonably, beautifully, and this is why I'll follow it? Or would it be more like the creator of heavens and the earth is commanding this to me? So as if the author is saying that do not get in between them and the creator by changing the language. And I mean, your question was about like the converts and whatnot. I think these are getting some exceptional cases. But if you think about it for a country where, or if your local masjid in which people are already immigrants and they know zakat means zakat and you don't need to translate it as charity, and they know Sawm is fasting and you don't need to translate it and whatnot. So reading the verses as they are would remind people that, oh, my creator is speaking to me. So he says this, and in terms of being a reminder, this is going to be a stronger reminder than you translating and putting it into your own words. So I guess in this regard, the question here is, or the thing that the author approaching is, you are forgetting what khutbah is for. And as if you are overloading it with a new perspective, which is not heavenly, but earthly, which is, and which eventually is neglecting the real purpose of khutbah. So is this acceptable, is I think what the author is questioning here.
Yeah. Thank you for refining, that point and making it clear. I would say, like, yeah, absolutely, the Quran is the probably the best thing you could hear, in terms of reminders of the religion and obligation, this and that. But in that case, then why even why even have Arabic in the khutbah in the first place, right? Because human words and speech will not come near Quranic verses and such. You could just, it seems, if you want to go that route and sanctify the Jummah and use the best words to remind the people, you should just have an Quran recitation, right? No human speech needed because that would only dilute the message or distract from it. But I think the point is clear, and unless there are further comments or questions, we can move on to the sixth obstacle. Alrighty. Since the great interpreters of the law among the righteous early generations of Islam lived close to the time of the companions of the Prophet, the age of light and age of truth, they were able to receive a pure light and make pure interpretations. But the interpreters of the law at this time look at the book of reality from behind so many veils. They look at the book of reality from behind so many veils and from such a long distance that they can see even its clearest letters only with difficulty. If you say the companions also were human beings and not free of error and differences, while the means of interpretation of the law and the ordinances of the Sharia is the justice and truthfulness of the companions on which the Islamic community have agreed, saying, all the companions were just and all spoke the truth. The answer: yes, the absolute majority of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were lovers of the truth, truthfulness, and justice. For in that age, the ugliness of lies and falsehood was shown in all its ugliness, and the beauty of right and truthfulness was shown in all its beauty in such a way that the distance between them stretched from the ground to the divine throne. There was a clear separation between them from the depths of Musaylama the liar at the lowest of the low to the degree of truthfulness of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, at the highest of the high. Indeed, just as it was lying that brought Musaylama to the lowest of the low, so it was truthfulness and right which raised Muhammad the trustworthy to the highest of the high. Thus, the companions who held elevated sentiments and worshiped good morals and were illuminated with the light of the conversation of the Son of Prophethood did not stretch out their hands to the buffoonery and filth of the lying in Musaylama's shop, which was so ugly and the cause of dissent, and they shrank from unbelief. So too they shrank from lying, the companion of unbelief, and sought as far as they were able, especially in relating the ordinances of the Sharia and propagating them, truth, truthfulness, and right, which are so fine and are the cause of pride and glory, ascent and progress, and were the thing most in demand from the elevated treasury of the glory of messengership, and which illuminate man's social life with their beauteous splendor. The companions acted in conformity with them and were desirous of them. This is certain, definite, and necessary. Whereas at this time, the distance between truth and lying has become so narrow that they are now quite simply shoulder to shoulder. It is extremely easy to pass from truthfulness to lying. Lying is even preferred to truthfulness due to the propaganda of politics and diplomacy. And so if the most ugly and the finest things are sold in the same shop for the same price, certainly the jewel of truthfulness and right, which is most elevated and penetrates to the essence of reality, will not be obtained blindly, relying on the word and skill of the shopkeeper. Alrighty, I'll read it once again. Since the great interpreters of the law among the righteous early generations of Islam lived close to the time of the companions of the Prophet, the age of light and age of truth. They were able to receive a pure light and make pure interpretations. But the interpreters of the law at this time look at the book of reality from behind so many veils and from such a long distance that they can see even its clearest letters only with difficulty. All right, what he seems to be saying, the author, that the proximity of the companions in terms of time and space, right? They interacted with him, let's say daily. That helped them, helped them in their ability to receive or the light of revelation and interpret it, in a better way. Maybe they had a better understanding, they had a better grasp. They just had some sort of proximity because of their proximity to the Prophet. It was an easier task for them, whereas for modern jurists, there is so much distance in terms of, say, space and time and proximity to the Prophet that is veiled for whatever reason. So, Brother Yusuf.
So the ijtihad was like main ijtihads were made from the first few generations of Islam, and the author's point since the beginning of this chapter was those ijtihads are enough for you for the most part, or if you like, I mean, other than maybe some super detailed stuff, it's more than enough for you. And now he is bringing up the point that the quality of them were much different. The environment that they were born into, if you like, was different than the environment that you are in or I am in right now. Because I want to emphasize on this word environment, because the worldview or the state of people around me and around then is quite different. So they were able to understand, or they were living the life, especially at the time of Prophet and the Sahaba, were living a life in which they were longing for the truth, and like this immediate nearness of the Creator was so obvious for them, because they are living something in their daily life, and a new revelation comes. Like today, we are in our discussions, we are saying that we should read Revelation as it is being revealed to me here and now. We are trying to simulate this idea, and to what extent am I able to do it? Just question yourself how much you can read the verse as if it is being revealed to you right now. For them, this was literally the case. Like something was happening and the revelation was coming. So they truly felt the nearness of the Creator. So the environment was so much of an excited, like their feelings were so much excited at that moment. And the neighboring generations, in terms of time, was also smelling the same atmosphere, if you like, breathing the same atmosphere. But in our time now, we are so much far away from this state of excitement, I would say, and the state of pureness. Because, like, just check yourself. I'm looking at myself, my surroundings, me included. Our number one priority is to like get a decent livelihood, and decent really meaning having a house, having 2 cars, and I don't know, buying iPhone 14. Anyways, so this is the world I am born into. These are our priorities and how I'm going to show off to other people. So with this mindset, how far I am from those people who were really putting their lives at stake for reaching the truth. First of all, if you think about the time of Mecca, like in order to just declare La ilaha illallah, they were facing the persecution from the Meccan society, or to deliver the message to other needed people. They were putting their life at stake. Where am I? How far I am from that? And just think about my own troubles and how much really knowing my creator, feeling my creator, what sort of a big concern it is for me. So within that distance, the author says those first generations, they were really in that atmosphere, but you are not. So how are you going to then feel that, oh, I can do the same or I can do something similar? And in here, I'm really feeling the importance of, as the word, the author uses it, the Quranic word for that is sibgha, like the painting. So those people were really painted with the painting of, or the color of, the messenger himself. And the messenger, when I say messenger, I'm not really only thinking about, oh, how gorgeous and sound a message he came, like intellectually flawless idea he came up with. Not only that, but he really lived with this message. So being in that state is so important for me, because reducing religion just to another philosophy, another worldview, is so reductionist. But what author, I think, is introducing in here or suggesting is, this is a constant lifestyle of living in the presence of the creator. It's not only like something physical, it's not only something intellectual, but it is this, your conscience and consciousness is constantly aware of its maker, its creator. This is the goal. And this is how the Prophet lived and how companions saw him living, and they tried their best to do that. So I'm far, far, far away from that. And now this is why in the sixth order says, you being that much far away is making you really far away from the spirit of, if you like, Sharia, and the main point of it. So you shouldn't be really trying to compete with them. Even claiming to have a competition with them is an issue. But then the question comes, and the author is as if pulling us in a certain direction, because initially, at the very beginning of this chapter, he said that there are some people who are passing their mark, and this treatise is written to show them their mark, saying that you are transgressing, know your limits and stop there. But so far, he was just showing, how to say, suggesting mildly that if you act as such, you are going to be betraying Islam. But he didn't explicitly attack yet. But I think this is where he is now bringing the topic to, because he's, by just asking the question, if you say companions are also human, because so far companions were not in the picture, because the author was saying that ijtihad that is made by the first, second, third generation after Rasulullah. Now that in the sixth, he brought the topic to Sahaba, actually the author is implying that your problem is with Sahaba, not only with the mujtahids of the first, second, third centuries, but your issue is with Sahaba eventually. If you speak it or speak it not, this is the implicit question you will say. Sahaba is also human. They make mistakes. Why shall I rely on them more than I would rely on anybody else? So this is why the author now says they are not just any people. They were, the environment that they lived in was such an environment that they were like adoring truth, justice so much. So don't really compare yourself to them and say that as much as I am a human and fallible, they are equally fallible. So as much as I am trustworthy, they would be at most that much trustworthy. Why anymore? So the author really emphasizes the difference, a factual difference between the two, and saying that this is actually where you will attack next. although now you are entering this palace, if you like, as he was putting at the very beginning, by saying that, oh, I'm going to make ijtihad, says actually you're trying to discredit Sahaba. Eventually, maybe you cannot directly attack the Prophet, but it is enough to discredit Sahaba to make Prophet dysfunctional. Because now you're demolishing the bridge, then you can say, oh, yeah, Muhammad والسلام, was a good person. He was the nicest and the al-amin, the truthful and whatnot. But, people after him, how well did they transfer it to us? Or they were illiterate people. How well did they understand messenger really? So we are on ourselves now. Prophet lived, died, and we are disconnected from him. So these are, if you like, practically nowadays commonly used tactics to make Prophet inaccessible. So the author is, by this question, he's bringing this topic up.
Well, that was a lot. Thank you for your contributions. So I think you, at the very least, covered these first two sections. At the very least. I'm not sure it'll be necessary to read these following two paragraphs. Do we have any other comments or questions? Yusuf.
So, like in the addendum to this chapter, the topic about Sahaba will come. So this is why that question is really important, why such a topic would be raised, because actually this will tie the topic to the next one. And let me give you an example why this is important. And I'm going to give a name actually. So maybe there was a TED talk from a journalist, like an agnostic journalist. If probably you might have watched about it, because this lady, the journalist lady, I said I would give the name, but I forgot her name. But anyways, this lady was saying that she gave herself 3 months to study Quran to just show how old-fashioned and whatnot the Quran is. And then she says she took several different translations and started working on it, and just says that, well, I was actually so ignorant. It took much longer, like reading a scripture in 3 months. It was really my ignorance. Then she says a lot of good things about Quran in that presentation, really. But since she's agnostic, she doesn't believe in God. I mean, no statement whether he exists or does not exist. So you can guess how she would have approached the Quran, though, because in the absence of a statement for existence of God, the speech cannot be speech of God. Right. So it becomes speech of man, right? Mm-hmm. But then she has another book, this time about Prophet and Sahaba. I didn't read the book, but our good friend Jalal read the book. And he says, in that book, actually, her main premise is that Muhammad والسلام, was a good person. Of course, I mean, since she doesn't believe in God, so Prophet cannot be a prophet either. But what she says is Muhammad was so much of a kind person, and she's showing Prophet as a human, like as a not like a miraculous, extraordinary person, and just showing that he is just another human. Let's say this, from one sense, she is going against the extreme dishumanization of Prophet. So in this regard, maybe somebody might say that she's doing a service. But the main observation that Jalal made was, this person says Muhammad was such a far-sighted, knowledgeable, wise man, but the people around him were illiterate, savage, Bedouins. So they didn't really understood well what he said. So this is a super interesting presentation, actually, because I think this is, and my friend Jalal read this book by strongly suggested from someone who is like some religious figure, I would say, saying that, oh, this is a good writing, to just read this, see how this even non-Muslim person is appreciative of our prophet.
Oh my God.
But the truth is, under the guise of appreciating the messenger was being disconnected from the people by just saying that, oh, he was so good, yet the people around him were so below average in terms of their capacity and understanding. And I heard something similar from like nowadays some philosopher, Muslim philosopher in Turkey. The point he was making was, he was saying that Bilal Habeshi, what do you think is his intellectual capacity? Like, he was just an ordinary man. He was a slave. Come on, he is saying. He says, in this day and age, we have so much knowledge. We read all these different philosophers and 14 centuries of philosophy. Muslim philosophy is made on top of that. And on top of that, we had access to the Greek philosophy and all this knowledge and everything. So, like, okay, those people were nice, kind people, but how well, really, could they have understood anything? So this sort of a comparison is being made. What is the outcome of this, though? Like making or discrediting Sahabi. And the author is going to give, like, dedicate an addendum to this. So just now I'm speaking in the sense of a motivation for where the issue is coming from. By doing that, really, what ends up happening is, first, now I'm evaluating everything in terms of information and reducing the message of Quran to simply just yet another philosophy. And then I make the people's intellectual capacity or understanding as how well they would have get the message, since it's simply an intellectual, just yet another philosophy in my eyes. Then I would value people as much as their intellectual capacity is concerned. And on top of that, what happens is, within Islamic world, saying anything bad about messenger is a taboo. So people are not very courageous about that. Like, other than some Danish cartoonists and whatnot, people are not courageous enough to say that, say anything negative about the prophet to a large extent. Yet, how can you discredit the messenger? Just break the bridge. Who is the bridge? They are where this section started with, first the first three generations, like the Tabi'in, but then it doesn't stop there, because as the author said, Tabi'in is like those first 3 centuries. They were making interpretations about the details of Sharia, but fasting, prayer, zakat, or like drinking alcohol or fornication, these are not the details of Sharia. These are the fundamental, very clear-cut things about Sharia. So if you would like to touch upon these, then you have to demolish the bridge of Sahaba. And this is where the topic is now coming to. The author is now saying that actually this is where you will end up with eventually. Because you are not courageous enough to directly discredit the messenger. It's going to be a huge deal. So what you would do is to get rid of Sahaba. How would you do that is going to be the topic of next section. So I think we need to be very much vigilant about what's going on in here. And although it might sound very pious and saying, oh, how good is the prophet, but his companions were not as smart, there is a very hidden but very strong, I would say, cunning thing going on there.
Shukran, appreciate the further elaboration, and yeah, I guess we would agree that if the Quran has any transformative properties, right, and where the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was the embodiment of the Quran itself, it should be reflected in his companions. So, any sort of criticism, excessive criticism, yeah, any sort of criticism against the companions is maybe doing a disservice, or is a criticism against possibly the Quran itself. Maybe this is a rough comment, but we can continue to the conclusion. No, that's a lot. All right, maybe we can start the conclusion. Just have it prepared for next week. Alrighty. Sacred laws change according to the ages. Indeed, in one age, different prophets may come, and they have come, since subsequent to the seal of the prophets, his greater Sharia is sufficient for all people in every age. No need has remained for different laws. However, in secondary matters, the need for different schools has persisted to a degree. Just as clothes change with the change of the seasons and medicines change according to dispositions, so sacred laws change according to the ages, and their ordinances change according to the capacities of peoples. Because the secondary matters of the ordinances of the Sharia look to human circumstances, they come according to them and are like medicine. At the time of the early prophets, since social classes were far apart and men's characters were both somewhat coarse and violent, and their minds primitive and close to nomadism, the laws at that time came in all different forms appropriate to their conditions. There were even different prophets and laws in the same continent. Okay. There were even different prophets and laws in the same continent in the same century. Then, since with the coming of the prophet of the end of time, man as though advanced from the primary to the secondary stage, and through numerous revolutions and upheavals reached a position at which all the human peoples could receive a single lesson and listen to a single teacher and act in accordance with a single law. No need remained for different laws. Neither was there necessity for different teachers, but because they were not all at completely the same level and did not proceed in the same sort of social life, the schools of law became numerous. But because they were not all at completely the same level and did not proceed in the same sorts of social life, the schools of law became numerous. If, like students of a school of higher education, the vast majority of mankind were clothed in the same sort of social life and attained the same level, then all the schools could be united. But just as the state of the world does not permit that, so the schools of law cannot be the same. So sacred laws change according to the ages, and depending on the people and the age, they have different laws. I think that's understood. But since then, humankind has developed and to the point where they can accept a single law and a single teacher. And so there's no further Okay, single law and a single teacher, and from those laws and teachers, depending on human circumstances and such, they have developed different schools, and the schools are different because peoples are scattered across the earth are different, and so their needs are different. That's the idea I'm getting. So I guess one assumption is that he's saying there's like a primary teaching, and then there's like a secondary teaching, where I would assume, of course, the primary teaching is more of the larger principles, and the secondary teachings are maybe like exceptions and specifics to certain peoples and this and that. Brother Yusuf.
So I feel like he is now stating a historical fact, saying that like several messengers came before Prophet ﷺ, and the message he brings, he says that I am the final of the messengers. This says something, because we see a change in the pattern so far. Prophets were changing, and prophets were, although their message in its core was the same, La ilaha illallah was always the message, but the way they practiced in life, which is Sharia, has changed over time. From messenger to messenger, their laws have changed over time, and the author says this is, and even certain messengers came at the same time to different people, and they had different Sharia, they have different laws. So which means Sharia is, the creator is giving laws to the people according to the conditions that they live in. But now that the final messenger has came, and then the Sharia that he brought is solidified, what are we going to do with this is, if you like, the question. So the author says this is actually showing that it's something about, again, how, look at the universe, like the world. The people are interacting with each other as if the whole world became like a single entity. This is why Rasulullah ﷺ was the final messenger. Like the level of people now became similar. The level of interaction among people became so much that a single message was sufficient for them, and this is why Sharia was solidified in there. Yet, still there are, although the interaction is now high among the people, and one Sharia is okay for them, but then still some of them are more living in a city life, some of them are living in the rural and whatnot. So the style of their living is not exactly the same. This is why madhahib, the path within the religion, has been different. And in the practices of the Messenger ﷺ, we see this not being so strict, but being relaxed. And this is how those madhahib came out. So the author is saying that this is because the people were different. And as long as people stay different, then those madhahib should stay there, because and as long as humanity never becomes a single type, if you like, then madhahib being different is out of a necessity, and it would and should stay as such. But if this changes, which in the last sentence actually he says, but just as the state of the world does not permit that, so the schools of law cannot be the same. So as if hinting if it could have been the same, like the state of the world was that people came to a level of so much being the same, then the madhahib could have been the same. As if like the implicit question is there, and the author is answering that question, I believe.
All right. Thanks again for expanding and drawing out the main points. I would say I'll make a comment that in recent times, it does seem that because of globalization and just the spread and access of information technology and stuff like that through technology, we do seem to be reaching a sort of a monoculture and single values across the world. So maybe the idea of a singular madahib for all people is not entirely far off. Of course, there's going to be nuances here and there, but there's that. We are very close to the end of our discussion. If there are, I'll ask if there are any comments or questions. We do have a minute to make mention. If not, we will end for today. Thank you all for coming. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا آمين الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.
I think from the 3 points in there, I guess there should be something like stop YouTube and Suhail, if you don't leave for a minute. So I think you should be able to stop broadcasting.
I think I did. Wait,